7 o'clock and I like starting on time, so I'm gonna go ahead and start. My name is Vukasin. I'm teaching the Unmaking of a Boar. It's a butchering class. Hopefully this is what you are here for, and I'm going to share some video of butchering from a boar hunt that I participated in this last fall. So if that's something that's going to bother you to see images like that, please be aware that I will be using them. I also have notes off here to the side in all of my stuff. So if I look to the side, I am paying attention, and I'm going to try to look to see if anybody has any questions throughout the presentation. So if you do, please let me know, and hopefully Andreas can help me keep track of that too, so I don't miss anybody. So boar were hunted throughout the Middle Ages. They were hunted primarily as a nobleman's game. They were hunted in the fall normally, because that's when you'd get them starting to get into crops. They would also be when the boar were at their fattest. It's around the same time of year that we traditionally harvest pigs now in modern farming, when you get the best meat off of the boar. You'd also have groups going after boar that were harassing serfs on the farms. Boar can be farm pigs that go feral. Pigs go feral in about a month, and they become extremely dangerous because they're not afraid of people and they know how people operate, so they can get into food stores and do a lot of damage to folks. So this is one of our boar, and the tusks here on the bottom of the jaw can do a lot of damage to folks. I know a lot of people have seen farm pigs, but not wild boar. And when boar go feral, they start to grow in those tusks really big, which is one of the reasons that you went after them when they went feral. So to start with the unmaking of the boar, when you went after the boar in the woods, it was hunted with dogs, with catch dogs and scent hounds. So, this is Gaston Phoebus. So you can see the dogs in the photo, and it shows both the scent hounds and this larger white dog at the bottom with the bigger head, and those were catch dogs. So the scent hounds found the dog, and then the catch dogs grab onto their heads and hold them in place so the spearmen can get the boar. You would stab the boar behind its shoulder muscle into the heart and lungs in order to get a killing shot as quickly as possible. It would also, and when you stab in, you push in, and the tines on the boar spear would hold it in place, and then you rock up and down in order to cause as much internal damage as possible to kill the boar as quickly as possible. You wanted to limit the animal's suffering. When you read either in both the Master of Game and any other books on medieval hunting, they talk a lot about how they don't want the animals to suffer. They don't believe that is a good hunting practice, which many good hunters believe that today. Once the boar was killed, they would hang the boar upside down by its back feet. So there'd be back joints through here, through the ankles. This is my demonstration animal. And you'd hang it upside down. Often that you see deer hung modernly. Boar were butchered in the forest where they were killed. You would transport the meat after it was butchered back to the residence of the noblemen. So they would hang the boar upside down, and they would get rid of the blood in the animal, usually by slitting its throat, but the blood was saved. Most often it was mixed in with the day-old bread and while it was still warm, and that was fed to the hounds as a reward for that. All the hard work they did, because they found it and they caught it, and humans' job was just to kill it. Why difficult is not quite as difficult as the dog's job. So they got a good reward. Modernly, you see in a lot of boar hunts, when I've gone boar hunting, the guides will feed the innards, all the organ meat or the pieces of fat or skin to the hounds as a reward, to teach them that this thing they did is great and it's delicious when they find it at the end, to kind of keep them and keep their hunting going. One of the other things they did with the letting of the blood is that they would also cut off the genitalia of the male pigs, and those would also be fed to the dogs as a reward or kept for the king's table, depending on who was doing the hunting and the particular taste preferences of those individuals. From there, we would, because our boar is hanging upside down, you're gonna, you had the head. We're gonna remove our head first and get the collar for the neck, which is because pigs don't really have like a neck like we think of a human neck where we have the jawline and we have a thinner neck. Pigs tend to be head, then neck, and it all kind of looks like one piece, which is very similar to my stuffed animal here, which is one of the reasons I like him so much for this. Because that's all one big thick piece, you'd either cut it for roasts or you would keep it modernly we use it for a lot of sausage meat. Not a lot of people like neck roasts, or they're difficult to get at without a lot of knife skill, sometimes depending on the size of the animal. So we tend to use that more sausage. Now I'm going to try very hard to share my screen. I have some video shots of the butchering from the last boar hunt, and I'm going to share one of those around that neck area. Give me just a second.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. I'm gonna be super frustrated if this doesn't work. That's okay. I'm just gonna keep going. All right, so from here, so you'd remove the front, that collar first. And then from there, at that point in the medieval hunts is when they would go for the organ meat after they removed the head and the neck. Modernly, when we kill an animal, we tend to gut it right away in order to start cooling down the meat, in order to help with the cooling process, because we are usually eventually planning on refrigeration and or freezing. Medievally, they didn't have refrigerators or freezers, so the steps they took were a little bit different and a little more ceremonial. So you'd go for the heart and lungs, which is remove those portions. They would also remove liver and kidneys and intestines. Intestines are kept for sausage, which is what we still do, and liver and kidneys are often kept for high table, depending on what the preferences were of the person. They were often still taken back up to the cook in the kitchen, because even if you didn't eat those cuts of meat whole, they were often used in other recipes. The next removal sections are the shoulders, which modernly we tend to think of hams as these big hams. So I can use this. So our modern hams, we are usually shoulder meats. So this area here, or on my picture here, so we have this ham here. So those are our modern hams, though the word ham does tend to refer more to the back leg of the pig as opposed to the front leg. But modern pigs are much larger than medieval boar, barring Russian boar, and a back ham of a modern pig can be like a 30-pound ham. And I know there are some folks who enjoy 30-pound hams, but those don't sell very well at the grocery store. So we tend to get the front shoulder ham as opposed to the actual back ham cut of meat. We use the terms interchangeably, where medievally they were separate things. The other parts of those, they would separate out the different leg bones. A lot of the times you'll see cuts of meat that are we have the back, there we go, the back leg here, where they have this leg joint here, and we're removing looks like the shin bone that attaches out to the foot. and remove those separately. So they became two different pieces. So you'd have the shoulder, and then you would have the pestolets, which is like the leg bone. And then you would also have the feet, all 4 feet, which we would save the feet. My husband very much helps me out when I butcher, and he likes to remove the feet from things because you remove them by twisting them and it cracks it free. Next on medieval hunt, you would remove the whole side of bacon, which is can be a very large piece on a hog, especially a farm hog, but on a wild boar, it differs in size. I've had boars that have very beautiful cuts of bacon with our fat and meat, and then fat and meat, and they're beautiful and they would make great bacon. I've also had boars that had very lean bacon because it'd been a lean year for the animal and they've been run around and chased by dogs a lot, so they were not very fat, and that meant the bacon wasn't really worth keeping. It went into the become sausage meat pile as opposed to be something delicious to eat. Next, we'd remove the haunches or the back hams from the animal, and those would come off last. And because our animal is hanging upside down, we're kind of working our way from nose up to where it's hanging up here from the branch. So we would remove the head and the neck. We got rid of our front hams. We got rid of all our innards and our bacon. And now we're removing our back hams from the spinal column here. So you would have all of the legs, and then you'd have this back area. Once the hams were removed, this would get laying flat. And along here, we'd remove sections of chine, which is modernly called back straps. So you remove those nice back straps of meats, and then you would have sections of ribs and pork chops to remove as well. Along with this process, when you were removing the ribs and the chops, you would have the tenderloin meat to remove. And those are the little tubular portions that go with those. Okay. So as we remove those, and then from there, you would pack everything out. And medievally, when we packed animals out on horseback, they would pack them in the packs. Some cuts got packed with salt, some were just themselves, and they'd be packed out in the order that the animal was anatomically in life. So the person at the head of the train would have the head, and the person at the back of the train would have the back of the animal. And so we would ride out in the same formation that the animal would be in real life. And this was part of the ceremony of the hunt, and that we think hunts in the 14th century with this sort of cuts and ceremony were often tied to the church, and we treat the animal well in order to thank the church and God for the blessing of the hunt, or for eliminating that dangerous animal from the fold. So on top of all of those things, the person who was in charge of the medieval hunt was the king's head huntsman. He carried his hunting knife for finishing off the animal, which sometimes is done with a boar, that if you can't kill it with the spear, you get close enough to it to then kill it with a knife, usually with a throat cut or additional cut to the heart and lungs. He would also carry all of the different types of butchering knives on him. I was fortunate enough to have an artisan of the mid-realm make this for me. This is a medieval cleaver that's out on a 14th century cleaver on from a forester's kit that's was on a museum display in London. I believe it is no longer on display there, but it looks very similar to our modern cleavers, where we have the nice big heavy end to it. There's a lot of heft to it, but this was used to remove the ribs from the rest of the body, or cut through different parts of the animal. In the Middle Ages, we don't see a lot of the same cuts that we did modernly. Because in the Middle Ages, we like to go with our, where our joints are, as opposed to having saws in the field, because everything was done with knives. We didn't cut things apart with saws. We didn't go through bone, we went through joints. So this is my little example of deer and I also teach this class with deer. But on this side of it, you see there's a lot of different possible cuts, and a lot of these aren't necessarily at joints. This is all the modern cuts. On this side, we have the medieval cuts, which are generally larger until we get them back to the kitchen for final processing. Because on top of having the cleaver, our royal huntsman would have what be very similar to a modern chef knife and a very similar to a modern paring knife, and possibly a fillet knife on his kit, depending on if he had more than one knife set, depending on what they were going for that day, because different animals and different quarry would require different skills from him and from his apprentices. I most often butcher with my 6-inch chef knife and my little tiny paring knife. I've also butchered with other different kinds of knives, because there are other cultures that do different things, and that's been kind of a fun experimentation for me. But unfortunately, I could not get my screen to share properly, which I'm really sad about, but I will be more than happy to see if I can get that try again. Andreas, if you could help me see tell me if it works or not.
Sure. If you want, you can send me the link and I can try and share it here too.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to let it play. So, because I couldn't get it to play earlier. So this cut right now is we're taking off the shoulder. This is my boar from the last hunt I was on. So we're taking off the shoulder meat. The shoulder is a big flat piece, similar to like your human shoulder, where you have that big shoulder blade. So we're taking it off at the shoulder blade, as opposed to going deeper into the body. So instead of going as an inward cut, we're having a big slice taken away. So that is me, and then Masahiro is the gentleman helping me. Count Seto was very kind enough to videotape my butchering for this particular hunt, and has allowed me share the video with you folks tonight, which I very much appreciate. So in this picture, the dark red closest to where my hand is where one of our spear shots came in. This particular sow probably weighed about 300 pounds. She was a large Russian boar, and it took more than one. I received help in order to bear her to the ground, so she received more than one spear shot, and that dark area is where one of the shots came into her heart and lungs. So I'm trying to work around the area of damaged meat. It's one of the other things that you would have to do in the field, is that worry about that damaged meat area. Bruised meat doesn't taste good, so people don't want to eat it. And you also have a lot of blood clots. I also, you'll see, pick up the leg and move it up and down. I'm trying to cut through the joints as they would have done in the Middle Ages and remove that sort of area. And that helps me be able to feel where that is. When you're butchering a hog that is, you would buy from like a store or things like that, generally when I've got them whole, they tend to be cold, and it's harder to get that manipulation. But since this is fresh, it's a little easier to get that manipulation. Let me skip ahead. All right, there's Masahiro. There you go. So he's helping me. This sow is over 6 feet long, so we had a very interesting time trying to butcher her. So this is it afterwards. You got both of those front shoulders are off. Down here, you can still see her head is still resting on the ground. I haven't been able to extract any of the neck meat yet, which is improper medieval butchering technique, but at the end of my day, I was just trying to get this particular one done. Okay, so these are the ribs. So this is my cleaver, which is it's an Eastern European style cleaver, is the one I took with me on this hunt. And I'm cutting along the spinal column to separate each one of those ribs at the joint along the spinal column with the cleaver. And each rib is a separate hit. I'm sorry that my head is in the way. So you can see where that gets removed. And then once I get down to where the heart and lungs and where the spear damage came through the ribs, and all this meat down here is pretty bruised and beat up, that is where I've decided, based on that, to cut through. I also cut here along the sternum in order to remove the ribs from the sternum, so you get a rack of ribs as opposed to rack of ribs plus sternum. And then I also use the cleaver to cut it free. I was very fortunate that this particular sow had a lot of fall fat on her, which will make for very good eating this winter. Okay. Now we can go the other side. You're doing the same thing. Oh. There we go. Sorry. So we're gonna go the same thing for the other side, where we remove the ribs and then come straight down.
No. I mean, we'll steal some of the footage, but yeah.
Yeah. So the same thing on the other side. The other thing that I do is with my other hand that doesn't have the knife in it, I put pressure on to help pull things apart. Because we want to get that separation to get the knife in to be able to remove them. See if I can get the other one to pull up that I wanted to share. Okay. Okay, so these sections are here. So on my hand right now is the bacon from this sow. So because she has so much fat on her, the bacon on here is worth taking. In the Middle Ages, you definitely would have taken everything. Modernly, if the bacon's not worth taking when I hunt boar, I put it in the sausage pile. But this works out really nice. She's nice and fat. So this whole piece right here is bacon. Or is the bacon cut, it will be cured and become what we think of as bacon. So there we go. There's a side of bacon.
Yeah, let me go get up the double duty. Let me go get it.
So Seto and Masahiro were very helpful to me, helping me bag this up while we were going through this process for this very large animal. So there's the bacon from the other side.
Okay. Oh, go rinse it. Got it? Yep.
Yeah. Slimy. Yeah. So the next portion that I'm working at here are the tenderloins. I like to pull the tenderloins out before I take the ribs off, because it helps with my personal skill level. I feel more comfortable doing it that way. When I do it the other way, I have damaged the tenderloins in the past, and that's one of my personal favorite cuts from the boar. So I like to take them out before I cut off the ribs, but after I take off the bacon, because with the bacon gone, there's a little more space and you can see things a little nicer. So the tenderloins are the tubes of meat back in there. They're along the top of the body, but they would be the internal musculature of the animal when she was alive. So a lot of the tenderloin muscle is encased in like a tube of membrane, and that I can break apart with my fingers, which is what I'm doing in this video currently, is that I'm pulling that apart with my fingers and making small cuts to get it to release with the paring knife in my hand. So, okay. You guys can see it. There we go. So this is the tenderloin right here. And I'm finishing pulling apart that membrane in order to pull that section of meat out of the animal. So my goal is always to get up as furthest towards the rear of the animal as possible.
And I know that's what we said over and over and over, but it's really the truth.
So,
this is so
in order to get as far up to the rear of the animal as possible, because I want to get as large of the piece of meat as possible, because it's one of my favorite cuts, so I want to enjoy as much of it as I can. All right, so now we're going to skip ahead a little bit. So it's very hard to see on her, but from the tail, her spine is kind of at a curve. It's coming straight down, which is what I'm trying to feel at through my fingers. There's a lot of fat on this animal, so I had some trouble with this particular section. I'm trying to get the back straps off of the animal. So we skip ahead a little bit. So this is the beginning of taking the back straps off, working down. They're going to go all the way along the rib cage here. So it's a nice, it's a large cut of meat.
It's a great example of a soup.
So there we go. So we're cutting some of the fat away because I'm having trouble being able to feel it. So you can see this is the top of the spinal column and the ribs, and this is that tube of meat. Here, the backstrap tube of meat. Medievally, this is called the chine. They would have cut it up into 4 separate sections to transport it, as opposed to leaving it as one big tube. You'd kind of have the section that goes over the rump and comes into the ribs, and then you'd have the section that goes from the ribs up towards the head, and there's one on each side of the spinal column, so you'd have both sections. So once you get the backstrap started, you can see this has a similar membrane structure where I'm not necessarily cutting everything, but the weight of the meat is kind of pulling it away from that membrane, and I only have to make small cuts where it gets kind of caught in order to remove it from the animal.
Gotcha.
Trying to cut it out of the hole.
Sure.
All right. So, where's the last? 4. There we go.
Your Grace, there's a question.
Yes.
Actually, a couple questions.
Okay.
Catherine Euler asks, start to finish, how long would it take to butcher the boar in period?
So to butcher the particular boar hanging in the video took us probably an hour and a half. In period, you would have had a team of people working on it, so it would have probably taken less than that. The idea is to get it broken down as quickly as possible and back to the cooks in the kitchen, who are the people who know how to preserve the meat. I haven't been able to find any of the hunt books I've read. I've not gotten a lot of information about like the timeline, besides that they wanted to get it back to the cooks in the kitchen so they could eat it for dinner. So presumably that would be faster than I personally can butcher, because you'd have the head forester and you'd also have his apprentices and helpers to help break down the animal. And so you have more than one person on a boar, makes it move faster. Hopefully that is helpful.
And then the second question from Scott Hefcorn is, why wouldn't the huntsman have hung the animal for butchering? If it's so much easier to work / break an animal down vertically, why would they have done it all on the ground?
So we would have started with it hung. You would have started with it hung up by its back feet and taken off the head and the front hams. And then they would have moved to taking off the back hams. So they're only separating the ribs and the back strap, with it presumably on the ground, from the most detailed descriptions I can find of this particular process. But in Gaston Phoebus and other illustrated manuals, they do also show the boar hung, why they're removing the cuts that when you read like written accounts of it, that they removed later. So presumably they may have figured that out as they went along with as bigger the animals they got, the more they hung them as opposed to just allowed it to sit on the ground. So that was done somewhat. I also know from experience that hauling a 300-pound animal up into a tree that's tall enough to hang it from is difficult to find. And it takes a lot of manpower. So, and to hold it there also takes some strength and ingenuity. But if this is something you did all the time, hopefully that was something that you had already figured out how to do. Does that answer his question?
Well, I'll let him answer, let him comment on the Facebook.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Oh, my husband is standing here and has a question.
I don't, maybe I missed it, but what about when would you skin the animal?
Okay, so skinning of the animal came before the butchering process. Because you would want to get they would take the animal and they would scald the hair and scrub the hair off of the animal. Something we don't do a lot of today is that they would leave the skin on. The skin was something that would be considered edible, depending on the particular age and size of the animal. Some of the older male pigs, they developed a lot of scar tissue from previous hunts or encounters with villagers, and that wouldn't be particularly good eating, but they would leave the skin on the animal to help with some of the preservation process. Plus, medieval people liked pork cracklins too. So you take the skin back and you make pork cracklins later. Not called that in the Middle Ages, but if you take, pork skin and fry it, it's pretty tasty. So you transport that back as well and keep a hold of that. There are also accounts of them skinning and using boar hides as clothing or making pouches or other useful things like that. They'd also take back the skeletal bones, hide, tusks, boar hair to be used to make brushes, all the different parts of the animal that we don't necessarily hold on today. They would keep a hold of and make cool stuff out of, but the rest of us like to make more cool stuff with. Am I good, Andres? Do you have any more questions?
Not at the moment, no ma'am.
Okay. All right. Good. I'm going to keep going. Okay. Once Boar got back to the kitchen, the larger cuts of meat were roasted off for the hunters as a celebration of the hunt. So you would break down those back hams and back straps into their roast sections, and those would be cooked for the table to celebrate the hunt, and that we successfully got a boar today. There is a book called the Book of Carving. It's a 15th century book on table service, but it does a really good job of describing how we would serve boar to a head table, where you would have the presentation of the cut of meat. Often with a boar hunt, they would present the head of the boar to head table to show how beautiful and cool the animal was, especially if it was a male boar with the big tusks still in it. A lot of the times you'll see this in modern taxidermy, but boar tusks, once there's been some cooking involved or a little bit of good knife work by the cook's helpers, you can pull the tusks out and make them look like 2 times as big as they actually were in real life, sticking out of the jaw, which makes the animal look even more impressive when you present it to the head table. So you would do things like that and present that at the head table. And after that presentation, those cuts would be taken to the sideboard and cut into small bite-sized pieces and then served with the appropriate sauce of the season, according to the humors of the Lord. And then that would be individually plated in small pieces, and that would be presented back to the Lord at head table for their consumption. So nowadays we see a lot of, in like movies and things like that, we see like these huge pork chops or giant pieces of meat, and everyone just sort of tears into it, where the boar, as it being served from the hunt, would have had a lot more ceremony with it, and you wouldn't have had that giant hunk of meat sitting on the table. That would have gone to a sideboard to be cut appropriately and then served in more of the fancy restaurant style plating than the big chunk of meat style plating. I seem to successfully have talked very quickly, which is something that I do. I have more pictures and video I can share, but are there any other additional questions why I've reached a pause point? Okay. I really want this video to play, but it doesn't seem to want to. Okay. All right, so that is our guide, Roger. He is helping us hang this particular boar for the butchering process with the wench on his truck. Because she is so heavy, we did not have quite the capability to both hold her up there and tie her at the same time. So that part was quite the adventure. So that's my Kellic and Count Seto and myself, and then Roger in the back. So even though this is modern equipment right here, this sort of tying where you would have the feet tied apart and you would have these slits in between the tendons. Let's see if I can, there we go. You'd have these slits in between the tendons to hang the boar, is how you would have gotten it up in a tree in the Middle Ages. Modernly now, they have really fancy metal hooks and things like that to use. Why maybe those would have been hauled out into the forest to do this. Most often you would have, find the strongest branch of appropriate height and tie the boar up in order to get it to stay there. And on top of all of this, you would have, other people and dogs and other things around to contend with, because until you fed the dogs, you didn't want to send them away because you want them to be continuously excited about the hunt. Okay. This one just doesn't want to play. Maybe. No. And my husband, Kellic, is my skinner for this. He skins for me, which allows me to keep clean hands, so we're not mixing hair in with meat, since we try to get it to go straight to the freezer. The place we hunt at has us put the butchered meat directly into chest freezers, so that helps with that sort of contamination that we worry more about modernly. This doesn't want to play for me either, so my technical difficulties is just something I'm going to deal with.
What would the video have shown?
I would have shown you skinning. Other items from medieval hunts, they not only hunted boar with 6-foot spears, which is this example of behind me. This is my boar spear. So you would have, these are the tines I talked about previously. I'm sorry I did not cover this. So these are the tines. And then you'd have the leaf-shaped head. Now this one is really pointed on the sides. There are some that are more curved. There are a couple of different shaped versions of this. The big thing that makes it a boar spear are the tines. These stop the boar on the ribs. Boar are mean. If you stab it, you have its full attention, and it is perfectly happy to run up the 6-foot spear in order to kill you, even though it is killing itself. So the tines stop it from its ability to do that. They also help give you that point of the control on the animal where you're trying to push it down towards the ground. Because boar were such a big animal and considered such a frightening animal to hunt, you could hunt with other blades in order to prove your skill. So they had people who hunted with swords. So this is my husband. This is a boar that he took with the sword that he's holding, which is also something they would have done in the Middle Ages. We also have accounts of people hunting boar with a long knife, similar to this one. I haven't done either one of these things. I'm happy to keep my approximate 6 foot different distance away from the animal trying desperately to kill me. But they would have hunted with other things to show their prowess of the hunt. So that allowed other things to come into play besides boar spears. You also see some accountings of hunting boars from horseback. You'd have to have a really long spear to do that from horseback effectively. They do sometimes, you can throw like a javelin style spear at a boar, but the more effective way to kill it is with a boar spear with the tines with more force. Pigs and wild boar all have shielding. So on the head and on the shoulder parts here, kind of down to where this crease is on my example here, there are plates of hardened fat that are at least a ½ inch thick, even on a young animal. On older animals, they get thicker. They have accounts to 1 inch or 1.5 inches. And it's a plate of cartilage and fat that has very little nerve endings. So if you hit it with an arrow or with a spear and you don't actually go through all the plate, they don't really care. Like, you have not affected them. It maybe hurts like you cut the skin, but that's really it. You haven't disabled the animal. So if you haven't disabled the animal, it can, 1, decide to run away from you, which they often do, or 2, decide that you are now the biggest threat they've ever seen in the entire world and they must eliminate your existence from their herd. So they will come at you. Or if you're hunting in a group and you take a bad shot and it skips off, it could come running towards your hunting partner. It's trying to get away, but now there's something in between it and its escape, and it'll go after that person. So when we boar hunt, you try to get back here into where around that plate. So you're going to get up and underneath it to get to that heart and lung shot underneath that plate. Okay. I think that is all of the information I have. I know I am under my hour, but if I do have plenty of time for questions, or if there's anything else, there's something came up in the chat. Okay, so if there's any other questions or comments, either on our Unmaking, or I'm happy to field questions about boar hunting recently too, please let me know, or Andreas will let me know if their stuff comes up on Facebook. Maybe. Okay. if you're interested in learning more about this, there are several books that I referenced. I'm going to read them off and then them for me. But there's The Hound and the Hawk, which is the art of medieval hunting. And it's a treatise on hunting. It reviews most of the hunting literature on hunting in the 14th and 15th centuries. I find that very helpful. It gives a breakdown of not only the hunt, but like some of the processing afterwards, which is the part I'm really interested in. I enjoy the hunting a lot, but I'm very interested in the processing afterwards. The Hunting Book of Gaston Phoebus. He shows a lot of good medieval illustrations of hunting, which is really great. There are not a ton of them on medieval boar, unfortunately. There's a lot on deer and some other animals, especially and a lot on the pictures of traps. But there's only a few illustrations of the boar, but it does give you a good kind of idea of all of the people involved in a hunt for a single animal like this. Another one is The Master of Game. It was written for Prince Henry, and it was about hunting all types of games in the season in which they're being hunted. Modernly, we have a lot of legal regulations about when we can hunt different animals and when we're allowed to do that. And a lot of those match up with the medieval time periods. They would have traditionally hunted based on the how the animals behaved and when they were be the best eating. So I found that very fascinating. It also talks some about the breakdown of the animals. And then the last one I mentioned is the Book of Carving from 1508. And it is a book about how to carve meat for table service, which is kind of the end product, the end fancy part of butchering, because once you get everything broken down, you still have to have people eat it. And so your last kind of end fancy bit of butchering is making stuff beautiful for the head table. So those are the primary sources that I've used for this particular presentation, as well as just experience, as much experience as I can get my hands on to practice, because there's nothing quite like being able to feel how joints move and see how bones are put together in order to know how to cut things apart. Right. Unless I have any more questions, Andreas, I think I am concluded.
No, ma'am, no more questions.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming to my presentation. I appreciate it a lot, and thanks for sitting through my technical difficulties. I'm glad that I got some of it to work for you and I got to share some of it, but I appreciate you all very much for coming. Thank you.